Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Many of you have probably heard the term job crafting, and while some of you know exactly what job crafting is, there are those among you who may not be sure exactly what it is or how it works or how it can affect or contribute your own work experience or your own work environment. Job crafting is generally defined as the employee's ability to make proactive and purposeful changes to one's job. It can also reflect an employee's ability to change or enhance their working environment in such a way that it will be more aligned with their own needs. This is a general idea of what job crafting is. The biggest focus or the biggest driving factor when it comes to the idea of job crafting is the goal of individual employee well-being. This is why job crafting exists in its truest purpose. Something else to consider when we talk about job crafting is the proactive engagement of the employee. This means from initiation to implementation to periodically making adjustments as they are needed, maybe with the passage of time or a change in situation or other needs. Job crafting can bring with it a sense of empowerment, a sense of responsibility, and a sense of ownership when it comes to one's own working environment. To a large degree, successful job crafting depends on the employee and their efforts. But it's important to remember that managers, or the organization in general, also has a big responsibility when it comes to successful job crafting. There are those individuals who may not be very likely to be proactive, to speak up, and to bring up the idea of job crafting. It is then up to the manager to reach out and connect with those employees to explore the idea of job crafting and how it might work for that individual. You may be wondering, what does job crafting look like in the real world? Here are a few examples, and by no means is this an all-inclusive list. Job crafting can include shaping your work environment. That could mean your actual physical workspace. That could mean your work schedule. That could mean your ability to work remotely or to work on site or to have some kind of a hybrid type of arrangement where you can work partly on site and partly remotely. But as you can see, shaping your working environment can come in many different options. Job crafting can also include task crafting. Task crafting can pertain to actual tasks, your responsibilities, and even the resources that are available to you at your workplace. Job crafting could also mean redefining or reframing your job and where it fits within the greater whole of the organization and how it contributes to the greater whole and how the organization achieves its goals. So when we reframe how we look at our jobs, it can then lead to a very different experience. Job crafting can also mean redefining the meaning, your personal meaning of the work that you do. That could be what your efforts mean within the organization. That could also mean what your efforts mean within the world beyond the organization, whether that means the community within which you work, whether that means what your efforts at work mean for your family, whether that means what your efforts at work mean for the greater whole in terms of our society or even humanity. Job crafting can also include redefining relationships. That could mean redefining your relationships with your colleagues, with your boss, with your customers or clients. You can look at those relationships in different ways. Maybe you see them as partnerships or creative opportunities rather than simple basic transactions of what I can do for you or what you can do for me. So these are just a few examples of what job crafting could look like in the real world. But what's important to remember is this, that job crafting is good for both the employee, the individual employee, but also it is good for the organization. When we look at job crafting and the changes that it brings with it, especially when it becomes part of the organization and part of the employee work experience over time, we see better organizational performance. We see better employee performance as well. Things such as better engagement and greater motivation, especially intrinsic motivation, have been linked to job crafting. Of course, it can also lead to greater job satisfaction and improved organizational citizenship. So it's not difficult to see that job crafting can be good for both the individual employee, but also for the organization as well. As I mentioned earlier, managers have an important role when it comes to job crafting. I know that a lot of what I mentioned is focused on the initiation and the efforts of the employee to ensure that they have the kind of workplace experience that benefits them and that allows them to experience appreciation and well-being for their own time spent at work. But managers are just as important in this equation. As I've already mentioned, there are some people who by their very nature will not be proactive in approaching management to discuss the job crafting options that may exist within the organization. This is where a good manager will know who those people are on their team and will be proactive in approaching those individuals. Job crafting may be the exact thing that the individual needs, that the individual can benefit from in a way that will bring forth their own success, but also contribute to the organization's success. So, good managers know what's going on with their people and know which of their individual employees are less likely to speak up and bring up this idea of job crafting. It's also important for managers to pay attention to what each individual job crafting project or effort really looks like. You have to know what the goals are, and you have to, as a manager, make sure that these goals are realistic, that they are aligned with both the organization and the employee and their purpose there, and that these goals are also attainable. There's no point in putting in efforts into job crafting that is not set up for success from the beginning. And while we encourage employees to be creative and free-thinking when it comes to job crafting, it's the manager's job to make sure that employees stay on task as far as getting things done during their time at the workplace. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. First and foremost, job crafting focuses at its very basis on the well-being of the employee. It empowers the employee to contribute and to enhance not only their working environment, but also their working experience. This is something that can have tremendous benefits for both the employee and the organization. Through job crafting, employees are empowered to influence things such as shaping their environment, shaping the tasks and responsibility, or crafting their tasks and responsibilities, having a say about the resources that are available to them. Job crafting can include reframing one's job and redefining the meaning of their work and their efforts. And of course, job crafting can also include redefining relationships, whether that means relationships within the organization or between the employee and the customer or people outside of the organization. It's no surprise that job crafting comes with many benefits, and although its main goal is employee well-being, it can be good for the organization. It can improve organizational performance and, of course, individual performance among employees. It can lead to greater motivation, greater engagement, and better organizational citizenship. Of course, managers play an important role in job crafting. It is up to the skilled manager to not only know who amongst their team members may have fallen behind in initiating job crafting opportunities and then engage that person, but the manager also needs to be on point in terms of the goals that are related to specific employee job crafting and keeping everyone on track. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to consider job crafting and how it could play a role in your own workplace experience. Of course, if you are a manager, someone in a management position, you can consider job crafting as it relates to each individual employee on your team, but also as it relates to your own job experience. So while managers have that responsibility to look out for their employees, they also have the responsibility and the opportunity to consider job crafting for themselves. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of the podcast, and that is Stress Free with Dr. G. The link is in the description below. In addition to the podcast or the video version of the podcast, you will find other videos on my YouTube channel, specifically videos that focus on stress management. So I encourage you to check out Stress Free with Dr. G on YouTube. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.